Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ministry of Propaganda. It's me here, Rich, and Chris. We are going to be talking about the recent ICJ case launched by South Africa against Israel, accusing them of genocide. And we're going to be talking about that case as well as the fallout. So, Chris, where would you like to begin with this one?
So really, this is it's unprecedented, isn't it? What's gone on here? Obviously, the scale of this war now, we're past the 100-day mark. Uh, it's gone further than we ever would have imagined. More journalists have actually died in this and any conflict in recent memory. I saw a child's dying basically every couple of minutes, and what's I find is almost refreshing is that the media is now starting, in certain circles, to catch up with the world opinion. What we've always said about Israel, people are starting to see it, and you're starting to see more and more of Israel's long-term allies starting to lose patience in real time. That's now becoming more and more apparent to see. I remember in the last episode that we did, we talked about France's Macron's comments that he made to Israel, saying that Israel needs to stop killing babies, and that at the time was quite shocking to hear a French president say that. But now, where they're actually getting rebuked by, to some degree, even the White House, it is unprecedented what is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, it's unprecedented in a number of different ways. The conflict itself, as you said, the number of journalists, the number of children, the number of civilian dead, the scale of the bombing, the amount of the bombs, the statistic going around that Israel has dropped more bombs in the last 3 months, the last 100 days, than the US dropped in 6 years of the Iraq War. So that just gives you an idea. A tiny territory, Gaza, more bombs than 6 years of fighting Saddam and then all the insurgents of Iraq. So this is crazy. Yeah. Then the next thing that I suppose that makes it unprecedented is what's just happened now, which is basically the fulcrum point, the breaking point of the international system. You have now South Africa have opened the floodgates, have opened the gate to having Israel actually be answerable to the ICJ, to the ICC, to all of these laws and conventions of since 1945 of the UN and whatnot, humanitarian law, international law. Now those things are being tested, and the US, the UK, Germany, the EU, the collective West, whatever you want to call it, now have their key ally, particularly the US, is effectively going to go on trial for genocide, is going on trial, is on trial for genocide, which is a huge problem, a huge headache for them. And if they don't uphold international law, and if the ICJ doesn't uphold international law, and the ICC doesn't uphold international law, then basically this is the end of the international legal system. It's the end of humanitarian law, which is, an unprecedented moment where the powerful are being held accountable to the system, and the system, we're seeing that system actually is real.
Yeah, I think in the great event that's going to come out of this, I think, is the sort of public relations side of it. Like I said, it's shining a light on Israel's crimes to the world populace. In terms of government structure, I think we're going to see how toothless the ICJ and the ICC really are. I don't think Israel's even a signature of the ICC; it's a signature of the ICJ, unless I've got those two the wrong way around.
You're right.
Sure.
You're right.
It's always been a bit of a joke that Israel's a little bit too white to be tried in the ICJ. It always seemed that these sort of international courts have been set up to punish usually independent African Arab leaders who dare to go their own way against the interests of the West. Other than the name escapes me, Serbia. I can't think of another. Thank you. I can't think of another white leader who's ever been successfully prosecuted in the ICJ. Obviously, Russia last year was told by the International Criminal Court to cease military operations in Ukraine, and they said, well, no, we're not even a signature of it, so we don't have to listen to you at all. But that just shows that this in itself is unenforceable. But in Russia's case, which is something I think would hurt Israel more, what it could do is it could leave it open to economic boycott in a way that
Mhm.
we've already got the BDS movement, but boycott, divest, sanction, but that is
Mhm.
very much a grassroots organisation of consumers boycotting Israeli goods. A lot of states around the world actually put laws to try and stop this happening. But if Israel are found guilty in the ICJ of war crimes,
Mhm.
then I think what you'd see is more and more corporations start to think twice about putting money in Israel. Who wants to be the company if you're um, the head of a telecommunications company like EE or O2? Do you really want your company to be linked to genocide?
Mhm.
Or as we've seen now with Starbucks, I believe that it's becoming now a big thing because they've been hit so hard in the wallet, they've started changing their name in certain airports to basically try and get around the boycott. So it does work, but I think this labeling, official labeling of you are a genocidal regime
Mhm.
will have that effect on them.
Mhm.
And as we all know, countries like Israel, like apartheid South Africa, they cannot survive without international capital pouring in.
Yeah. Israel, the Zionists, the current government in Israel, are absolutely terrified of BDS, absolutely terrified of
Yes,
boycotts of any form of shape. So there's also, of course, your sports, your academic boycotts, which also are gaining momentum. I think Gary Lineker, the football commentator, he's also calling for a boycott of Israel from sports, from football.
yeah,
There's also a motion for the Olympics because this is the Olympics this year in France. Yeah, but they are terrified of boycotts. But you're right. I mean, the difference between the ICJ case, the ICC case, sorry, against Russia, is that uh, obviously there have been sanctions and economic burdens put on Russia, but Israel is not Russia. Israel would not be able to survive large scale boycotts from the general world, even if they would literally then be propped up entirely by the US if the US chose to do that, which would be very expensive. It's already very expensive to put them up. But it would be even more expensive. Israel cannot pull off a Russian style, workaround of boycotts. That burden would
Israel
eventually.
have been since creation financially plugged into the West, where of course the Russian Federation has only existed since '91. Then before
Mm,
that, there was the Soviet Union, which was completely economically unplugged from the West. So they can do it.
mm,
They've done it before. They can do it
yes.
again if need be,
Yeah.
as we've seen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just before we get into what I really want to see in the future in the media, obviously we've got an election coming up next year in America. And Biden's doing very badly because of his support for Israel. He's basically losing huge voting blocks, such as Arab Americans are refusing to support him.
Mhm.
Um, but Trump seems to be whispering that he'd do things different. I'd love to hear more from Trump about, because we've always said Trump's a contrarian. He doesn't really have any ideological beliefs. He believes the opposite of what the other guy believes. So
Yeah.
if the other guy is such a shameless Zionist, would that prompt Trump to go the opposite way on the how does that fit into his America First
Mm,
ideology of
mm,
should we be supporting Israel? Should we be paying for Israel
mm.
if they become financial burden?
Yeah.
I'd like to see where that line of thought would take him and how that's gonna work out in
Right.
the next election.
Right. I mean, Trump. When Trump was in power, I mean, he kissed the wall. He wore the hat. His
Yeah, he did
son-in-law.
all that.
He gave his son-in-law the job of negotiating arguably the most complicated geopolitical peace deal ever,
Yes,
which
and that's
surprisingly
going to
didn't
come up
work.
again later on in the episode, I think, with the two state
Sure.
solution.
Yeah, definitely. No, yeah, yeah. Let's come back to Trump in a bit later. See how Israel politics. But I think that if Trump was in power right now and this conflict broke out, I think he would still try and support Israel. I don't think he knows that's too big of a voting bloc amongst evangelical Republicans and too big of a voting bloc in New York, and then of course the lobby and
Definitely.
but yeah, let's go into the case itself. So obviously South Africa opened this case. They launched the case late last year. It was heard on the 29th of December. Submitted on the 29th of December and heard early January. I sat and watched through 3.5 hours of both sides and listened to both of them. The South African case was, in my opinion, I've also listened to other people's comments on it and heard what they reflected on, the experts. It was a very well formed case very
It was.
professional. It wasn't sensationalist and showed pictures of dead bodies all over the place and dramatized. It was very top down, showing what the leadership was saying, what Netanyahu had said, what the prime minister had said, what the minister of defense had said. Things like Amalek, things like kill them all, things like turn this place to dust, and all the other genocidal language, as well as let's cut off the food, let's cut off the water, coming from Gallant, the minister of defense. And then they worked those comments down to military commanders and then down to soldiers, showing videos of soldiers singing songs about killing Amalek and killing them all, while they blow up houses and while they detonated stuff, showing videos of soldiers living out that language. So obviously the case was, this is potentially a genocide, or this is a genocide. We believe this is a genocide. A genocide is being committed. It's not. No one ever says I am committing genocide. So they drew out and identified the very public genocidal comments by the leadership, and then drew those down as to and amplified into their implementation. The Israeli reply was basically two parts. One was a technicality argument saying, oh, no, you didn't lodge a dispute. You didn't tell us that you thought there was genocide going on. So you should have followed that due process before coming here, which, as far as from some legal experts, they said that this is a bit of a redundant argument, because clearly the court has already identified there's a dispute because you have two sides in the courtroom. So there clearly exists some dispute between the two. And South Africa did lodge the correct thing. So they spoke about it on multilateral forums like the UN General Assembly. They sent them these emails. They sent them these letters. Ramaphosa made some statements. So that whole thing is a bit of a farcical technical argument. And to be honest, if the ICJ chooses to try and use that as a reason to quash the case, or to delay the case, I think there'll be outrage, complete outrage, because it's a silly argument. But the second part was a combination of kind of sensationalism and drama. So they said like, oh, well, South Africa is not recognizing that Hamas exists, and Hamas started this, and Hamas uses human shields, and Hamas does this, and Hamas does that. But even in their own arguments, it would say Israel has a right to defend itself within international law. But that's exactly what South Africa is saying. And that's what it said in their case, that you do have a right to defend yourself within international law. That's what we're saying. You're not following international law. So it was not a very strong defense. And theirs was far more emotive, far more provocative, far more unprofessional, let's say. And there's also a very, the only person that actually made a big blunder was the Israeli British lawyer who lost his pages and had to get a new copy of his papers given to him. So he's the only one that made a mistake out of everyone. That's just
I think that's what's really been apparent as well, going through the lawyers, is that obviously when you're talking about a case like this, you need to talk about it quite cold-faced in the face of legal argument. But that strategy falls apart when you're a Zionist, because then all of a sudden you're quite barefacedly doing your defense from an ideological standpoint rather than a legal standpoint, and those two things are completely incompatible with each other, as has been made apparent. A lot of what their points are of defense just don't make sense as a defense of, we're defending ourselves from a genocide. And of course, one of the main points that we've heard over this is, for it to be a genocide, you need to be able to show intent and capacity, which Hamas do not have. I am one person. If I am a racist against the Welsh and I want to commit a genocide against the Welsh, I can't, because I am one person. If I had an army of anti-Welsh militia, and then that starts to look like I've got the capacity again, that's sort of the scale of numbers that we're talking about. Hamas is, how many fighters did they have that day? In its peak, they normally have only about 20,000 fighters. That is not capacity, even if they wanted to commit a genocide against the Israeli populace. And despite the fact that's not their stated goal. Their stated goal is always, as we've shown this in the videos last time, where we showed videos of their leaders talking about this, they've always been a national liberation organization. And to the point of, I think in the past 5 years, they actually even removed the controversial line, and that did mention Jews, to replace it with Zionists, to just point out, no, this is our fight is against political Judaism, not religious Judaism.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, then I don't know if you've seen some of the comments coming out of Israel and whatnot in response. One of them is from Netanyahu himself, who said, regardless of what the ICJ rules, what the Hague says, we will continue. So, in a way, he's already lost the moral argument or lost the high ground, because he's saying, I don't care what the court says. So, even if the court does give them a delay or give them some rope, some slack, let's say, he doesn't care. So, he's already shown that even if they get the slack, he's like, well, we would continue this war even if the court said, stop, you are doing genocide. So that's a big loss. I don't know why he chose to say that. It was a very foolish thing to say. I mean, I know it's for domestic consumption for him. Yeah.
Well, he said on Twitter as well, didn't he? Like, if he said it in Hebrew on domestic TV, fair enough. The majority of us can't speak it, and most of his allies wouldn't have cared to translate it for his opponents to use it against him, which I imagine is the case of a lot of bad things that you say. We don't hear about it just because we can't speak his language. But the fact that he did speak it in our language, on Twitter as well, it completely demolishes his argument. One of the big points that has been used in favour of South Africa's case is that they've got the moral authority to be making this argument. And Israel then countered it, would say, well, we're the only democracy in the region, because you bomb everyone else during their elections, and we're one of the original signatures of the ICJ. We always follow international law. It's like, you support it when it goes your way. As soon as the international criminal process is looking like it's going the opposite way, you put statements out like this saying we're going to ignore it, like they did in 2004 when they were told that the war was illegal, which they just ignored.
Yes, and the settlements.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, before we get into that, I mean, there are other ICJ cases which have launched following up to this in response to this. I just wanted to show a quick video then. So in South Africa's case, they obviously mentioned, like we already talked about, the public statements made by top Israeli officials. But they also had this guy here. So this is an Israeli veteran from the 1948 war of when Israel was established, and he was given a uniform, as you'll see. He was given a military vehicle to drive around in, and he was paraded around to go and speak to current soldiers, because of course he's in his 90s. And the stuff that he was saying was used in the case by the South African legal team. And I'll show it to you now. Listen to what he says and take a look at what he says.
תכסחו אותם כמה שיותר, שלא להשאיר מהם זכר. שלא הם, לא אמא שלהם, לא הילדה שלהם, לא התינוקות שלהם. אסור להם לחיות האלה. בימים האלה לא תהיה לנו ברירה. נקבל עוד טילים מהחיזבאללה, ויקומו כל הערבים בארץ נגדנו, ואז לא תהיה ברירה. מי יש לו נשק יירה בהם. אתה יש לך שכן ערבי, אתה לא תחכה שהוא יבוא אליך הביתה. תיכנס אליו הביתה ותירה בו. תיכנס בהם לפני שיפעילו את הטילים שלהם. אל תחכה שיגיעו ותקח את כיפת הברזל. כנס לפני זה, אבל אנחנו צריכים להיכנס לא כמו קודם. להרוס ולהתקדם, עם תותחים, עם הפצצות, להרוס בית ולהיכנס הלאה, להרוס עוד בית ולהיכנס.
I did hear that. That was quite some shocking language. And for it to all just be, again, guys, into that religious undertones. What happened? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Literally breaking the most sacred of commandments there. And I thought it was interesting because the guy's age, obviously, he said he fought in
1948.
Yeah, so for someone who was essentially responsible for the first Nakba. I think it's still going on yours, but it's amazing that these people exist to be used like that. Israel always try and use this fake statistic that they were the home of Jews after the Holocaust, where if the biggest population of Jewish descendants of the Holocaust are actually in America, mainly in upstate New York, and this is some of the biggest hubs of the anti-Zionist Jews, who would fundamentally reject the state of Israel on those religious grounds. And I'm sure you've probably heard this story before, but when the state of Israel was originally founded in 1947, the UN received an objection from the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, saying, "Do not create a Jewish state in Palestine, because this is against our religion." And it just shows that these are non-religious Jews who are committing this, and they make it so difficult to argue against, especially as a non-Jew. And they feel like if you're not a Jew, you can't make this argument. And for all it is bullshit. If they're going to argue religion to us, we should be able to argue it back, because that is their fundamental crux of that. That's their reason for doing this in their mind.
Yes. Actually, you mentioned the upstate New York anti-Zionist Jewish groups. There's actually a very good Twitter or X handle. It's Torah Judaism, and they've got thousands of followers now because of the war, and they are openly anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and these are Orthodox, hardcore Orthodox, very religious Jewish people, and lots of them, thousands of them. You should see the events they have, thousands of these people dancing and singing and chanting against Israel, and they join the rallies in favor of Palestinian liberation.
Yes, and of course. Like the true Torah Jews, there's a fair few of these groups, and I think it's important that we keep shining a light on this, because one of the main, the only stick that the Israeli side can beat us with to try and shut us up constantly is the accusation of anti-Semitism, and they will constantly do this. So I think it's really important that we do show that we are allying ourselves with a historically silent but very much large Jewish population who are basically shunned by the state of Israel for criticizing them as well.
Absolutely. I mean, George Galloway just had Ronnie Kasrils on his show. Ronnie Kasrils is an ex-ANC, ex-Mkhonto weSizwe liberation fighter, Jewish, who fought against the apartheid South African regime, and also spoke there about the fact that being Jewish does not mean you are a Zionist. There are thousands, many famous and important Jewish people that are not Zionists. And there's a whole list of wonderful Jewish people that fought against apartheid in South Africa and who are fighting again or calling for the end of apartheid in Israel, Palestine. Yeah, so definitely. But just wanted to get back to this thing on the language. So, this individual was obviously is an old guy. He's 90 years old or 95 years old. Sure, he's not exactly the spokesman for the state, but the point is the government was giving him speaking tours to go and speak to soldiers and telling them, like he said in that video, kill your neighbor. If your neighbor is Arab, kill him. So not even just Gaza, that's talking about inside Israel. If you have an Arab neighbor in Israel, go and kill them. This is the war of our time.
What he was saying seemed pretty off the cuff. It wasn't as if it was an official tour, wasn't it? It was being given by the army, but it's not as if they gave him speaking points, because you could tell from the way he was speaking, like, this is really what he thought. These are really his own feelings, and that's why the Israeli army used him. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I suppose if the army had given speaking points, then at least you've got the defense afterwards. Well, I was just reading what I'd been given. But no, this guy, these are his true feelings. He really believes this.
Yeah. The ICJ case, of course, I think they said they're going to give their results, their ruling on this provisional measures. I'm not an expert on what provisional measures means, but it's obviously an advancement of the case for them to be considered properly, I suppose, by the end of the month. So before the end of January, we'll have that case. But since then, when South Africa launched its case, there was already a huge amount of support from all sorts of countries. So I'm going to put this up here, which shows who supported and who was against. And just some details, like you already mentioned, Chris, the difference between the ICJ and the ICC. So I'll just put this up here. You can see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So which countries back South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ? So just going to skip down here. So the Organization of Islamic Countries, so that's 57-member bloc, which includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, and Morocco, voiced their support for the case on December 30th. Malaysia obviously called for it called for the independent Palestinian state to be established on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Turkey was in favor. Jordan was in favor. Bolivia was in favor. The Maldives, Namibia, and Pakistan. The Arab League, which is 22 member countries. Colombia and Brazil too. And then, of course, you have some other bits and bobs here. So then this is the signatories to the Genocide Convention. So 153 countries. So that's, what is that, 75% of the world? There's about 200 countries in the world. So that's, nearly 70 or over 75% of the world have ratified it. So only for some reason Japan, Thailand.
I was just thinking, what have Japan got to hide?
I don't know why they're scared of genocide or being accused of crimes of genocide. Don't know what's happened there. And then a couple outliers. But generally you can see that it's, most of the world. Then you've also got the ICC. Okay, so Bolivia has already filed a request to the ICC, as well as South Africa, Bangladesh, the Comores, and Djibouti had done so already. South Africa actually used that filing as evidence of the dispute being properly registered when they went to the ICJ in their case. So they used that as evidence that they had filed a complaint. But so just the differences between the two. So the ICJ established in 1945, so that's the highest court of the UN. The ICC is much younger, only 2002. It's not part of the UN. They're both in The Hague, in the Netherlands. But the key difference here is that the jurisdiction, so the ICJ is UN member states, that's the jurisdiction. The ICC is individuals, okay? So the cases for the ICJ are basically between states, and then the one for the ICC are individuals, which is why, subject to the Rome Statute, which is why the ICC prosecuted Putin and didn't open a case against Russia. Then your enforcement is, of course, different. So the ICJ relies on the UN Security Council and, the veto power. So obviously, even if it gets to the point of a proven case of genocide against Israel, the US will probably still use its veto. But I guess that's beside the point, though. It's still a moral victory. So if it goes that far, a proven guilty genocide, and the US then uses the veto, it will be the end of the US moral authority in the eyes of the world. Even though I suppose you could say that moral authority was never there, but we could say with certainty that most people would go,
the excuse of it.
Yeah. And then, of course, ICC, it's up to the member states to enforce it. So the ICC will still pursue its cases because it's having cases lodged all the time now in follow up to this. So, for example, let me see if you can see this one here. Can you see this too?
I'm still on the observer page.
Okay, let me just change that then. So since South Africa's case, you've had then 2 or 3 other ICJ cases open up. So one of them is this one here, which is from Chile and Mexico, who opened their own cases. So sorry, this is ICC, excuse me. This is the ICC's probe. So Chile and Mexico have opened their own ICC probes. And then you've also had Indonesia has opened its own case. So this at the ICJ. And their one is not for genocide. It's actually for, if I'm not mistaken, it's the occupation. Let me just double check that. So here it is. Obviously, Indonesia files a lawsuit against Israel at the ICJ. It's for the occupation. So theirs is not about genocide, it's about the occupation. And there's a third one, which I've not got here, another ICJ case opened by another country, I'm not sure which one it is, which is for war crimes. So you've got now 3 ICJ cases against Israel. So even if the South African one gets kicked out for whatever technical thing or whatever reason, there's another 2 coming. And I believe Jordan is also preparing a separate case, but that one was reported, and then maybe it was an ICC case. But nonetheless, you've got a groundswell.
And I believe South Africa is also preparing a additional case against the
UK and US,
United States and UK for complicity.
Yes.
So it does seem like this is the sort of tactic of the season, and like I say, it is going to give that sort of moral victory. In terms of Britain and America, they can ignore it, but I think Israel is in a much more unstable position than the United States or America. America and Britain are used to their leaders being accused of war crimes and can literally they've got the political sort of clout to ignore it and soldier on as if they haven't got the blood of 1 million dead Iraqis on their hands. But I don't think Israel do, especially not at the moment, especially not under Netanyahu. So it is going to be interesting to see how these sort of progress. Say we've never seen this before, and in this volume. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, really.
I mean, I don't see them being able to defend themselves on all of them. I don't think. I mean, to be honest, I don't think they're defendable on any of them. But the idea that they'll be able to brush all of this aside without having to pay some price is impossible. There's no way that would be insane.
In terms of this case against the occupation, that's going to be interesting because Israel aren't going to be able to use one of its main defenses, which is we're fighting Hamas. Obviously, we've seen a lot of this stuff on our channel. It's a lot of it's just sort of preaching to the converted. But for anybody who doesn't really know about the sort of this situation on the ground in the West Bank, Israel are always saying, "Oh, we're fighting against Hamas. Once Hamas are gone, things will be different." And so, well, Hamas have almost no presence in the West Bank. But yet, this month alone, Israel have actually bombed the West Bank, which they usually don't do. They usually don't bomb the West Bank. They normally just send soldiers in to just because they've got an occupation there. It's a free fire zone essentially. I remember when I was there, things can change so quickly. You can be in an area that everything seems calm in a market area. All of a sudden, van pulls up, tear gas being fired in the air, and live rounds being fired, and there's no clear sign of what caused this. What caused these soldiers to start firing? So yeah, that argument doesn't really fly in terms of the occupation. That people live there under such fear.
Yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, more than 350 people have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th in raids. And if you look at some of the footage of these raids, I mean, they bring in bulldozers, they tear up the whole street. They rip up shops. They've even bulldozed some monuments to peace. They've shot kids. They've shot innocent people. They've shot unarmed people.
When you bulldoze monuments to peace, there's no part of you that can think this. I'm on the good side. It's literally things that the baddies do.
Right. Yes. This is very much your "Are we the baddies" moment. I mean, yes. Also, some of the stuff in Gaza itself. I mean, blowing up an entire block of houses. On video. I mean, this is the other stuff, is that how brazen and stupid the Israeli soldiers are. I mean, there's countless videos of them just filming themselves committing crimes. It's not like, I mean, obviously there is other footage where Palestinians are filming them and they catch them, but there's footage of them, taking angle grinders to family safes. There's footage of them, detonating a whole row of houses and talking about Amalek and whatever. And they're filming themselves and putting it on TikTok. This will be a really interesting genocide case because it's the first time where the soldiers are filming themselves doing the crimes and bragging about it and publishing it and broadcasting it. It's crazy.
I've got one whilst we're on that of this video just to show you of the main university in Gaza that the Israelis have just blown up. So if we're going to pull this video up and then we'll have a bit of an explanation to what it is we're seeing and how this is quite indefensible.
You've sent it in the chat, right? Not. Gotcha. Go 1 second. Yeah, I also saw this video. This was horrendous.
So just to explain, so this building has actually been being used for the past week or so by the Israelis as a military command point. So they'd already taken it. And they've already decided that they don't want it anymore.
Here we go.
Now, let's see it again now.
Right. Yeah. There you go. Gone.
So I don't know about you, but that to me looks like a controlled demolition. They were inside and they rigged that building from the inside to blow.
Absolutely. No, that is definitely controlled demolition.
Yeah. So in terms of any military argument of why that building needed to be destroyed, there doesn't look like there is one. I mean, blowing up schools and hospitals, it's one of those obvious red lines. That's the type of thing that you deny doing. So I can't see any reasoning for that. I watched a journalist question the press secretary in the press pool in the White House about that. And obviously, the press secretary was saying, "Oh, we're asking the Israelis for clarification. So, what more clarification do you need? Like, you're not asking for clarification; you're asking them for an excuse.
You're just delaying as
That's
well.
all that can be given."
Yeah. No, I mean, from a military standpoint, it's indefensible. So I didn't know that they had actually occupied it and used it as a headquarters beforehand. But even if they did it, didn't is besides the point. So they obviously entered this building. If it had military, a weapon cache in it or whatever, you can take the weapons out, you can clear the cache, to then fill it with explosives in a controlled demolition and blow it up, considering that it's a university. I mean, regardless of what kind of building it is, even if it was a house, you don't have the right to just blow up territory, property, unless there's an immediate threat to life. So if they were firing from it, if there was a machine gun nest up there and they were firing RPGs from it, maybe then they could have blown it up with airstrikes. Maybe then you have a plausible argument.
Had to have been done whilst the fighting was happening. For it to have been occupied for a week and then done, that's your argument gone.
Yes.
Didn't even do that at the hospital. Do you remember the hospital that they said that they found those tunnels? They talked about it for 3 straight days, and then radio silence. We don't hear about the tunnels anymore. As if they realised, actually, we haven't got the proof to sort of justify bombing this hospital.
Exactly. Yeah, one tunnel underneath it happens to transverse. There was they showed us the diagrams of layers and layers of tunnels and meeting rooms and all sorts. And what we ended up with was
one prime minister that said that the Israelis built.
Yes, and they said they built it, and it was just a corridor. I mean, that's enough to blow up kids.
I still can't get over that. The way that they just dropped in that interview to say that the Israelis built the tunnels under Gaza, and they dropped it in like we all knew. It was like, no, this is literally the first time this has ever been said.
Correct. So you also shared another video with me earlier, which is a clip from Al Jazeera as well, where it showed some of the language of the Israeli society. It wasn't just the government this time. This was also included the media, right?
Yes. So this just shows, in terms of when we talk about genocidal talk, there were normally like 3 pillars that we're looking at here. Obviously, government ministers, the military, what they're saying, because they're the ones who are fighting it. If your politicians are saying one thing, but your soldiers on the bottom are saying something much more brutal, and that's got to be taken into consideration as well. And this third, which is what your media is saying. And in terms of Israeli sort of society, we're seeing almost a harmony of genocidal talk of they're all saying the same thing, and our media are just choosing to ignore it. So obviously the covering the back this time, they are speaking it in Hebrew, in that attempt that nobody's going to translate it, but of course we are.
21st century, mate. Yeah. Let's take a look. Let's see what they say. Yeah, stop that there. What more do you need? I mean, you've got an individual saying, blow up more houses, blow up more houses. I don't care if they're collecting evidence. Yeah.
Obviously, the first guy who I believe is the leader of the religious Zionist party. So they're normally sort of portrayed as quite on the fringe of the right wing, but he has enormous support in the government and in society, and his opinions are essentially mainstream opinions. Saying that when we talk about killing Hamas, we're not just talking about fighters, we're talking about people who give out sweets and people who sing songs and clap. Obviously, he's being over dramatic there. Nobody's giving out sweets, but what he's essentially talking is he's talking about us, really, isn't he? He's talking about anybody who can say anything sort of justifying any position against them.
Yes. Well, this is the other argument that some of the Israeli spokespeople in the UK mentioned, is that South Africa is basically the legal arm of Hamas. They're playing the role of legal arm of Hamas. So this is also another thing that they're doing. Like you said, everyone who claps and everyone who dances and everyone who sings. Basically, anyone who chooses to oppose Israel in this point is somehow branded as basically being Hamas or helping Hamas or abetting Hamas. This is a key part of their way of dealing with criticism, with opposition to their genocide.
Which strikes me as a bit sort of toothless. Obviously, I've said in this before. So my wife is a solicitor, and we watch a fair bit of like the gangster films and things in court. And one thing that always sort of strikes me is that if you're in a defensive sort of legal position and you start making statements that could be seen as a threat in nature to the other side's family, community, like surely that's another charge for Israel to be on the defensive foot from South Africa and then make statements saying South Africa are the legal wing of the group that we've just said are terrorists and need to be killed at every level, supporters, sweet givers, support, then is that not what they're saying? Because that's how I interpret that. And if I was an extremist supporter of Israel, that's exactly what I'd be hearing. I'd be hearing the South African government are now fair game. They are now officially terrorists as per the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's certainly a sound interpretation. I mean, you could feel that threat. You can see the logic of that threat. I agree with you. Yeah. I just in terms of the UK though, we already talked about the fact that anyone who now talks about support of Palestine, there's these groups, Israeli Zionist groups, who are trying to single out and find a moment where you might say something in support of Hamas, which is now a prescribed terrorist organization in the UK, and then they'll use that as evidence and send it to the Met Police, and they'll try and arrest you. Many, as we mentioned, Rajiv Brar has already been arrested for this, and was arrested again as with other members too. But the other thing is just also the information war. So we've been talking about this SA case, the South Africa's ICJ case. The BBC and Sky News didn't broadcast the South African case and only broadcasted the Israeli defense. So in terms of the information war, you have a situation here where the British public broadcaster, the BBC, has chosen to pick one side of that extremely important case, as well as the private sector.
Obviously,
Sky News,
as well,
private news
quite partisan.
Yeah. Oh no. That's both private and public. So you might say, okay, well, the British state is the British state, and they chose to do that. But the fact that Sky News chose to do it too, that's independent media, one of the biggest independent media channels. So that's extremely worrying. Is that British people are not being shown both sides of the story.
Yeah, I think they gave a really poor excuse to why ratings of the day wouldn't allow it. Strictly Come Dancing if something was on during South Africa's case arguments, but then obviously nothing was going on during Israel. So we can show you their defense, but we can't show you what they're defending against. It's a poor argument. I think anybody who's outside of sort of Talk TV's viewership can probably see through that. It's interesting. Recently, we've seen, even if the BBC's official party line is still very much partisanship, we've seen more and more individual broadcasters on shows on BBC start to push back and question more of when these official Israeli spin doctors come on, and you can see they don't like it. They've never been questioned like this before by British state media before, and they don't know what to do. I've heard them just like, this line of questioning really is disgusting. I was like, because they have not prepared to be questioned hard on these subjects at all. And it just goes to show, because they've been gaslighting us for so long. And like, I remember when we talked about, just after the original after the Hamas attack in October, where they went into the media and they kept saying, we've all seen pictures and videos of decapitated babies. Like, hold up, no, we haven't. We've heard you tell us that we've seen pictures. 100 days in, I've still yet to see these pictures. And I've seen, like I said, my Facebook is literally clogged of dead Palestinian kids at the moment. But yet, I have not seen any decapitated Israeli babies. That you'd think the Israelis would have used that because it'd be PR. They said that we had a little private meeting where we invited Owen Jones and a few others to come and have a little private viewing of GoPro videos. It's like, but even that, Owen Jones came out and said that was edited and propaganda, and all the way through it, the guy who showed it us was referring to the West Bank and Gaza as Judea and Samaria. So,
yes. Even there, the political element.
Yeah, you couldn't have even through one meeting without talking about ethnic cleansing. It's Lebensraum, isn't it? Surely.
So, I mean, obviously, we did stress this before that there were crimes committed by the Hamas fighters on October 7th, undoubtedly. But yeah, you're right in the sense that the dramatization of certain, or the extension of certain atrocities, so the beheading of babies, but also now these stories about there was a guy who was cutting off a woman's breast while raping her and then shot her while raping her. I mean, again, we're regurgitating stories that are 3 months old, which are terrible. I mean, I have no doubt that atrocities similar to that happened, but they're being reformed.
It just
seems
like
new atrocities, which are even more and more insane.
It just seems like have you read the joke, The Aristocrats, where every time you tell it, you just add on more and more like horrible elements to the joke? It seems like that. Like not only were they raping, they were decapitating her and chopping her breasts off at the same time. It's like, really, like this seems like it's just getting more and more gruesome every time you tell the story.
Well, and the fact that they lied about the fact there was 40 decapitated babies, and then it became there was one that was put in an oven, which is horrendous, terrible, but we have to identify that there's definitely a sensationalist propaganda project going on there. Absolutely. Where you have to make the 1,200, all of them are innocent, none of them are soldiers, most of them are kids, most of the women, all the women were raped, gang raped, and their heads were cut off, and you just keep adding details, and then and of course it's very awkward to try and say, are you sure that happened? Because then people go, oh my God, are you questioning that this happened? Oh my God, this is a terrible crime. How dare you question this? How dare you?
And I think that's one thing that we need to get people to sort of normalize of, yes, we are going to question every story that Israel say because Israel are not a reliable narrator. And we should get into the mainstream's head that this is a country that lies. And like every time Russia says something, the BBC will always say, oh, well, this has come from Russia and Russia lie. So it's like, well, that headspace that they have for Russia, they need to start adopting that with Israel, because this is a country that cannot be trusted to tell the truth, and that will always twist every story. And like we said earlier on with genocidal talk from Israel, they've got all three pillars of society saying the same stuff. But with Hamas, you've got the leadership of Hamas saying these are the rules that we should be engaging, and our people below shouldn't be committing acts like this. And if they do, it's not sanctioned. But these kids who are now being born in rubble in Gaza, they're going to do horrific stuff in 15 years' time.
Absolutely.
Because they've been born into this. It's like the opposite of what is, we're de-radicalizing with bombs. It's like, no, you're accelerating it. And it's going to be so hard to control them because they're going to have such a passion for revenge against the people that have literally blown their families to pieces in many cases.
Absolutely. I mean, even Elon Musk said, you kill one person, you kill some family member, you create more insurgents, more terrorists than you've destroyed. So it's a losing method of dealing with the war. But I just want to go back to that thing about the perspective, so that anything that Russia says is not true. So we should have the same sort of logic applied to Israel, that the state of Israel has lied and continues to lie and will lie in the future. So there's a very good interview that, what's his name? Sorry, I've gone blank. He was interviewed by Piers Morgan. He's the Egyptian comedian. I've completely forgot his name now.
Assam.
Yes. Is it Assam?
Bassam, I believe.
Bassam, but yes, Bassam. So
yes, very funny man.
Yeah, very funny. He got into a very big argument with some big podcast in the States, and they were talking about the casualty rate. And the American host says, oh well, that 25,000 dead, it's Hamas's statistics. And he said, okay, well, whose statistics do you trust? And he said, well, okay, well, how many people killed on October 7th? And the guy says it's 1,200. And he says, well, I don't trust that. Well, because Israel made that. So it's very easy to sort of just dissuade that. You can also say the same. Well, if you don't trust anything Hamas says, why do you trust anything Israel says? It's the same logic to that too. But yeah.
And you get this whenever Israel carry out a bombing attack, and the BBC will do in the most recent figures. They'll always say 20,000 people have died as per the Hamas-run health ministry, as if it's basically saying take these with a pinch of salt because these are Hamas doctors and Hamas doctors.
Right. So they also, what I want to start doing, the other thing they do this is that they'll say, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah movement or the Iranian-backed Houthis. So we should just say the US-backed Zionists, the US-backed Israeli government. You should really put that same brand. So, okay, well, that the Americans have the finger on the button here. Yeah.
We said this, we're saying this with Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine have been bombing the Donbass since 2014. And in the eyes of the West and the eyes of the media, it's okay as long as when you talk about people dying, you say Russian-backed separatist. As long as they're backed by someone else, you can do whatever you want to them. That seems to be the rule. And it's a really weird way of justifying action against civilians.
Yeah. I think my final point for this was Blinken's response to South Africa's ICJ case, the genocide case, was that it was not helpful. There was no basis, and basically the main point being unhelpful. And I think it's just bizarre because what is helpful? Fast tracking shells? Yeah, but I was just saying, so the American action on this part is to go and do these ridiculous meetings, which have achieved nothing in the last 3 months, is flying around, sort of trying to be the modern Kissinger, Blinken being. But
he's gone through to all the Arab leaders, basically making sure that please don't join in.
Yeah. Right, and of course the Houthis, Yemen is joining in, and Iran is joining in. But the point I'm getting is that they've been doing the shuttle talks, and then in the US, Biden has fast-tracked tank shells. Biden has fast-tracked the sales of munitions, of the bombs. So it's not like they're just arming them; they're speeding up. They're trying to get the shells to them faster. Israel being, so that's helping. Is that helpful? Is that going to stop the conflict if you just increase the amount of arms? And of course, now the latest thing is that the US has said, Biden has said, we want to see a two-state solution. And Netanyahu has come straight out public and said, no, we're not going to have a two-state solution. Israel will be control of security in the region. Which, how's that diplomacy going, Blinken? Is that helpful? Is your stuff working? I don't think it is.
Yeah, it is an absolute joke. Just before we sort of do wrap up, I do want to touch a little bit on the regional thing, but just to start that off, I don't know if I'm getting a little bit into conspiracy territory, but obviously this week there's been missile exchanges between Iran and Pakistan. Yeah. Now, I've always viewed Pakistan as a Western satellite. I don't know many people, especially since pre and post Imran Khan. I think Imran Khan was basically ousted for trying to be independent from American foreign policy, and since he's been ousted, they've been sort of pulled back into the fold. This missile exchange seems to be America trying to use Pakistan to divert Iran's attention. What do you think?
I mean, so the first missile strike was by Iran, and you do have the target being obviously not the Baluchistan National Liberation Movement, whatever it's called, or the BL, whatever.
So this was meant to be in retaliation for the bombings that happened again by Soleimani's tomb on the anniversary of his death last week. But the initial response, the initial allegation was that the Iranians believed it was not just this group, but Israeli involved. And one of their strikes, they said that they've actually hit an Israeli, some sort of listening post in Pakistan. So obviously with a lot of sort of these strikes, sometimes it's hard to sort of tell who's actually been hit, who's actually dead.
Yeah.
If anyone's been hit. Saying an Israeli listening post was there seems like a good thing to say. So
yeah,
it's hard to sort of sell, but for the fact that they were involved or have been accused of being involved, and this is what's come off the back of it, it all seems a bit too connected to what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, that incident is I think it is related to obviously the general Gaza war, as well as Yemen, the Houthis and whatnot being involved in it too. But there is, of course, that domestic element, the regional sort of element, which is the Baluch independence movement. So you've got it, Baluchi freedom fighters or liberation fighters.
Well, that's all the South Pakistan, isn't it? So I suppose they use Iran as a base as well.
Yeah, they use both sides. So there's a province of Baluchistan province in Iran and Pakistan, and they both fired. So Iran fired missiles at the Baluchis in Pakistan, and vice versa. Pakistan also fired at the same group, which is odd because both times the target were Baluchi fundamentalists or fighters, not actual elements of the state. Because if there was a state-on-state action, there would be, this would be war effectively. I'm not too sure as to if it was a U.S. provocation. I do think that there probably is that Baluchi element which exploited that gathering and blew up bombs. But the other one is interesting though, is the Iraq strike. So Iran also fired some missiles and blew up some buildings in Iraq, in Erbil, which they said was a Mossad listening post or a Mossad asset, and as well as also striking Syria. But the thing about that one was also a capability show. I mean, you saw Iran pulling off a targeted strike with missiles, cruise missiles, and blowing up a specific target, which, of course, a show of force in a sense.
And that sort of sounds likely because yesterday, I believe, Israel have now fired missiles at Damascus, aiming at Iranian commanders inside Syria. So it sort of seems like that was a retaliation for blowing up one of their listening posts in Iraq.
Right. I mean, there's also the other element is that perhaps if the ICJ and these cases and the global opinion and BDS and economic sanctions start to close in, sanctions on economics and academics, and they get called, a genocidal state, it's possibly then in specifically Netanyahu's interests to actually agitate Iran to actually do something, because then the war becomes too big for it to be a case that we're just going to wait for the criminal court to you'll resign and eventually Israel will throw you over and we'll have a new state. It's in his interest to try and make the war bigger, too big to control, so that then it delays his inevitable day in court and his inevitable day in prison. I think there's an incentive there from them too, that they actually need to push the war to be bigger. The Israelis,
Yeah, I can definitely see this happening. I think at the beginning of this, in our last video, we spent some time talking about the prospect of this being a regional war, but it was all in the narrative at the time was, how is this going to avoid being a regional conflict? But now we are in that. We've got the Houthis who are, for all intents and purposes, one of the poorest countries in the world, who are committed themselves to defending one of the most persecuted peoples in the world, and are now being bombed by the two richest nations in the world. That should really say a lot more. I think the United States have now ascribed the Houthis as a terrorist organization, which is an absolute joke. And obviously the boats that they've actually targeted are Israeli boats. And at the end of it just, what this is saying to the world is that the West values trade more than human lives, or money more than human lives.
It is. And I think over the next 4 weeks or 2 months, as all of these cases go to court and we hear results, and we're all going to become experts on international law. But I think we're going to see that the US is going to be kicking and screaming about these cases. And I don't even know what their reply is going to be. I don't know how they're going to deal with it, because there will be cases against Israel. There will be success in the courts on one of them, and then one of them is enough for the ICJ to rule on this. So it's a checkmate. Actually, some the guys on the Iran said that this action is a checkmate by the South African case, and by the rest of them who followed through as well.
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, just sort of jump back onto what we were saying earlier on. Obviously, there's been a huge crackdown especially in the United Kingdom. Well, I've observed it more here because this is where I am. Of political policing, basically, as we've said, Ranjit Brar from our party has been rearrested on a separate charge, along with a few other comrades in the party. This is the literal definition of political policing, and when you watch some of the videos of it online, the police are so bad at sort of explaining what they're doing because they don't understand it themselves. They've literally been told this by the Home Office. At the beginning of this, remember Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary at the time, told the police basically to arrest anybody who was saying the phrase from the river to the sea, because that would be considered as hate speech now and anti-Israel. So it seems now we've got past the line of being able to sort of watch what we say because it doesn't make a difference. I think with anyone who sort of is prepared to be of any use at this point needs to sort of be willing and sort of proud to sort of pin the colours to the mast and sort of say that you can't, there's no eggshells left to walk on. If you criticise Israel, eventually they will come knocking on your door. So I think we can all just sort of wish for the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the Jewish state.
Of the Zionist entity, yeah, absolutely. I think I look forward to people advancing the boycotts and all the pressure that we can exert individually and collectively. I think this is a pivotal moment, as we mentioned at the start. Certainly a pivotal moment in many, many respects.
Absolutely.
Cool. That's all from us tonight, guys. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.